People and organizations who say that businesses and business in general runs on logic and cognition are, I'm going to be frank, full of it and doing not just themselves, but also their organizations a huge disservice in the long run. Hi, my name is Ria and I'm Forge, and today I am going to talk about empathy and how to grow your empathy and develop it and use it in a professional way in your work life. And I'm going to talk a bit about why that is important as well. So, a lot of times when we are in the professional setting, you hear the phrase, it's not personal, it's professional, or it's just business, as though to say, we have made all kinds of decisions that have to do with you, your department, your project, or whatever else, but it has nothing to do with who you are or how you are. It's just business. And that is a particular stance to take, but it ignores all of the decision making, communication, and just project and human management that goes into any kind of work that you have a decision that's made about within an organizational context, all right? Because even if you're looking at things on a macro scale, really big picture for a business, and let's say you've calculated certain human costs, the fact of the matter is, for information to get up to that point, there are human interactions and human interplay that has to come into being. And when we say that it's just business, it's just cognitive, it's just the facts, sir, we are actually not taking into account human behavior, which, as so much research has demonstrated, is emotion driven. So what we're seeing more and more nowadays through a lot of research, you're actually seeing quite a bit coming out of Gallup, and they have a new book, which I am not being paid for, but I highly recommend. It's The Manager, is I believe what it's called, where they're looking into the success of organizations and individuals. And it is that human touch that actually catalyzes organizations and people to the next level. No matter how good you are at doing your job, the minute that you have to interact with other human beings, a lot of us are pretty garbage at that. So in this video, what I am doing is I'm going to talk about the 3 kinds of empathy and how to develop and use that empathy in your work, considering that we are in a world that is becoming ever more heterogeneous, which means that the people within organizations come from different backgrounds, often speak different languages, they have different cultures, and they have all different ways of looking at things. So intellectually there's diversity, culturally there's diversity, and more. So I'm going to talk about empathy and the different kinds of empathies as tools to use and not use within the workplace. So there are 3 kinds of empathy that we use as human beings, according to research by actually several people. The 2 big ones that I've come across are Mark Davis and Paul Ekman, but there's been a lot of work in the field of empathy over the past couple of decades. And what you find is you have, again, 3 kinds of empathy. Cognitive empathy, so that's intellectual empathy. Emotional empathy, so, the heart feels what the heart feels, right? And then empathic concern, which sometimes is called compassionate empathy, but because compassion is a little bit different, we're going to stick to calling it empathic concern to make things clear. So, what does each of those 3 kinds of empathy look like? The first one, the one that we're the most familiar with, I believe, is emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is when you feel what another person feels, or you can very easily put yourself into their position, often because you have gone through the same thing. So, for example, let's say you are of a certain diverse background and you experience a lot of microaggressions at work. And maybe you see someone where they come from a different diverse background than you, potentially, let's say you're a person of color and this person is queer in some way, shape, or form. You don't have that exact background, but you can look at them and you can say, oh, I recognize and I feel some of what they're feeling. Like, this is something where I don't want to use the word triggering because that's a very powerful word, but their experience that they are going through or what they have told me about evokes a similar experience in my heart. And I am feeling that feeling in lockstep. Now, emotional empathy as a form of empathy is actually the most limited in certain ways kind of empathy, because what it does is it means that we can't go beyond our own experiences for the most part when we're feeling empathy for other people. So the more different people are from us, the more alien they seem to us, and the more we will feel ourselves unable to connect. We see this a lot in politics, in religion, or non-religion if you're looking at atheism, in cultural practices where there might be some kind of rich tradition one culture has and another culture says, that's crazy. What they did is really weird and different, and I don't understand where it came from. And because there are not enough emotional signposts to guide us along a similar emotional route, we can't really feel with that person. One of the other dangers to emotional empathy that there is that we will get very drained by emotional empathy. You see this a lot in health work, mental health care, and more, where therapists, social workers, and even people who are advisors to young people will feel themselves feeling with the challenges and pain of the people they work with, and will walk out feeling so incredibly drained. And this is often a case for healthcare worker burnout, because their emotions are so tied into those are the people that they are serving. So emotional empathy, it is the way that we, for the most part, think about empathy, but it is in a lot of ways, in my opinion, one of the most limited kinds of empathy, because it's very experience driven and it really takes a lot from us, so we can't sustain it. And that means sometimes we'll come off of this major outpouring of emotional empathy with someone else, and people are in trouble all the time, and we all have pain that's part of existence. And sometimes we're faced with another situation. And if you've ever heard of the phrase spoons, where I'm out of spoons, which comes from self-advocacy and communities where they are working with disabilities and more. If you're out of spoons, just you don't have anything left to give in a situation. So emotional empathy is something that we want to recognize as a tool, but it can be a very draining and dual-edged tool, and it can only go so far. The next kind of empathy that we can use is cognitive empathy. And this is actually, I have found with the people that I work with, one of the best ways to start building empathy, especially in our current workplaces, which are becoming more and more diverse and having so many different kinds of people with so many different kinds of thinking, feeling, and communicating. And what cognitive empathy is, again, intellectual empathy, is if someone is going through an experience, what you do is you try to break down and understand where someone is coming from. So that might not mean, if this person is in a hard time, to sort of drill them with questions about what they're going through. Online searches in Google are there for a reason, so you can always go, what is or why do people, X, Y, and Z. But this is something where you create an intellectual roadmap for you to follow. So you can start to say, oh, I see what they're talking about. I don't feel what they're talking about, but I see what they're talking about. And when people are coming to you with these emotional challenges, these feelings more, starting off from a place of cognitive empathy is also useful if you are developing your empathy, because you are not pouring yourself out into this. You are there, you are present, you are learning, and you are trying to respond in a constructive, hopefully, way. So, for example, let's say you are a cisgendered guy, or, a cisgendered guy. That's a good example. And a woman comes to you and she feels that she is being in some way, shape, or form discriminated against because of her gender. Now, as a cis guy, you are not going to have a baseline to personally understand what this woman is going through. But maybe you have seen women in your life struggle and you can construct a blueprint. Maybe you've been reading about a lot of things in the news and you have learned a little bit. Maybe there are things that other people have said that you can think of and say, oh, this is something where I have seen patterns like this in other workplaces or even this one. And start to contextualize what this person is saying in the best way that you can. And you know what? If it is your first time hearing something like this personally, not, overall, that can be really hard because you're usually being come to as a confidant or a leader. And so when this person is telling you things, you can listen and say, I understand that sounds awful. Can you tell me a bit more? And what are some things I could do to help? And try to learn and listen. Imagine that you are a social scientist and you are exploring this new kind of existing that is very real and very valid and you don't know much about. And so instead of having an emotional response to it, which can also trigger an emotional backlash, because sometimes we feel threatened when people come to us with challenges, because maybe we're having a bad day. Maybe we're having certain situations. You can instead take what in work can be a much more comfortable approach and look at it from a business, a very much more thoughtful perspective. And then when you're listening, take this person seriously. It takes a lot for anyone in any kind of business situation to talk about feelings because we're told not to. We're pressured not to. People say that's what HR is for or that's whatever else is for. So if someone is coming to you, maybe you don't have the same perspective. Maybe you think that the route is different than they've assessed, but take them seriously and start off assuming they're coming from a place of honesty. Sometimes they're not, but most of the time people are. And then the next step and the final kind of empathy is called empathic concern. And this is where we have compassion and feelings of support for the person who is coming to us with this issue. And there even is a little bit of emotional empathy, but we're not overwhelmed by feelings and being driven by feelings. We also are recognizing what's going on with them, or if we don't know a lot, we're trying to put pieces together to create that intellectual roadmap. And then we're thinking actively about how we can support that person from either a stance of proactive, let me help you with this, to just being there and saying words of support. Because empathic concern, it is the ideal melding of emotional empathy and cognitive empathy, and it leverages the strengths of both. So that's the final step. In a workplace, you do want to be careful to be professional and also be human and supportive because we create things in the workplace. We work on projects, we create business relationships, and everything is tied together with this human component. So when we take away the humanity from it, we take away a lot of times the binding glue that keeps us going. But we have to be able to continue to work in the workplace. So start with your cognitive empathy, temper your emotional empathy if you're what a lot of people call an empath, and try to build towards empathic concern where you have the structure of cognitive empathy, but you have a little bit of that emotional empathy going on when you're listening to people. All right, so that is the trifecta of empathy. If you're interested in more science-based tips, tricks, and tools for improving your life and career in balanced and effective ways, please subscribe. And if you're a leader or becoming a leader within a business setting, please look down in the links below in the description and get my free ebook on 15 science-based ways to be a more effective leader. All right, talk to you next time.